Good morning, everyone. Good to see so many of you here. Thank you for joining, all of you. It's really wonderful to see you for now the second meeting of the policy-focused track within Foresight's Biotech and Health Extension Group, sponsored by 100 Plus Capital. Really, really happy to have Dylan Livingston here again, who's chairing and heading really the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives. And we have lots more people joining. Again, as last time, I would just warn you that usually we always run out of space for questions. So please, if you want to ask something, if you have a burning question, ask it very early, because then we have more time to filter them through, and you get a chance to ask them at the end of it. That's all from my end. I will be in the chat in case you have more questions, but for now, I'm super, super happy to introduce you to Dylan, and let's see where this conversation is headed this time.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Allison. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. For those of you who don't know who I am, but you probably should because Allison just said it. My name is Dylan Livingston. I'm the founder and president of A4LI, the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives. The way this event will work is that I'll interview our guests for about half an hour, 45 minutes-ish, and then we'll open it up to Q&A to the audience. So today my guest will be Joe DeSantis, Chief Strategy Officer at Gingrich 360 and one of A4LI's board members. Joe leads the consulting division at Gingrich 360 with clients in healthcare, aviation, and education. Joe also serves as Speaker Gingrich's primary liaison to campaigns and lawmakers, and was the communications director for Newt's 2012 presidential campaign, where he was responsible for dealing with media relations, advertising, online fundraising, operations, basically the entire thing. He also helped co-author the New York Times bestseller "To Save America" with Newt, and so we're really excited. There we go. So like I said, we're very happy to have Joe on today. Today we're just going to touch on Joe's background specifically and how he got interested in this longevity space. We're also going to discuss Joe's experience in electoral politics and how he thinks longevity would fare on a debate stage or on a campaign trail. And then we're also going to touch on where Joe sees natural allies for the longevity movement in Congress today. So Joe, thank you very much for joining us. Before we get into the weeds here, can you touch on your background and discuss how you got involved in the longevity space? And then also, can you shed some light on how Newt got involved in the longevity space?
Sure, and thanks for having me. And Allison as well for hosting this. My background is I kind of got interested in it just through a combination of personal and professional interest. I think I first became aware of it just through some fitness podcasts or something along those lines, where someone was referring to NMN supplements or something like that for people that are in their late 40s and 50s. And I'd never even heard of it. And so I started looking into a little more. And I think I'd probably heard Aubrey de Grey or David Sinclair on Joe Rogan's podcast. That led me to read David Sinclair's book, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. And I realized reading that there were just enormous public policy implications here. Because one of the things that we have been constantly dealing with, again, Gingrich 360 and my consulting healthcare work, is how do you deal with this problem, chronic disease? And, you look at out your budget forecast for Medicare, or even just for in the general healthcare sector, it's clear that while there are a lot of marketplace problems with the lack of competition and things like that, there's an overall trend of chronic disease driving costs. The roughly 20% of all Americans account for 80% of all healthcare spending. 5% of Americans account for 50% of healthcare spending. These are people with chronic disease. And while I'm all for I'm all for encouraging healthier lifestyles, and I think that there are things we can do on a public policy level or at a clinical level to do that, that involve the way that financial incentives are tailored within the healthcare industry. I think we have to be realistic about our ability to really engineer a society-wide shift and behavior. I personally, as a conservative, don't want a government that powerful enough to make me exercise, or anyone exercise or eat healthy, things like that. So, uh, that really leads you to the potential of healthy longevity medicine, and the capacity to really lower the risk of developing these age-related diseases as you get older. If you do that, your projections in Medicare suddenly shift dramatically. In addition, you get higher economic growth, and I was really excited to see, I think it's David Goodman and some other people's work updating on that, seeing the enormous economic upside that the longevity dividend concept. And so that really got me interested in this. And so I was talking to Newt about it, and it turned out that he had, because he's been a long time supporter of NIH funding. When he was speaker, he doubled the funding for NIH. I think right afterward, after he left the speakership, he was touring at NIH, and he was talking to researchers about what they were doing with nematodes, and just dramatically extending their life. And he was fascinated with that. And so it was something he was aware of already. And so I approached him, and Newt has a podcast called Newt's World. We had David Sinclair on the podcast, along with Nir Barzilai, talking about their approach and their work. And they were very enthusiastic. I think that someone, connected to government, that, was politically still very active, was interested in this and recognized the potential of it. And so we got more involved. I think the other thing that got Newt really interested in this was he was on the Alzheimer's Commission, and their conclusion from the Alzheimer's Commission was that if you just delay the onset of Alzheimer's by 5 years, you take half the projected cost away from in Alzheimer's spending. And that's I think it was projected at something like $30 trillion by 2050. And just delaying it by 5 years would basically cut that cost in half. And so what you have the potential with longevity, healthy longevity focused medicine, is to apply that sort of logic and that dramatic cost drop across all age-related diseases. We got very interested in this. For a while, Newt and I were actually exploring the idea of setting something up similar to A4LI. But ultimately, though, I mean, we've got, it just wasn't something we could concentrate on full time. And so I was introduced to Dylan via Keith Comato at Lifespan.io. And it really seemed like Dylan was, thinking about doing something similar and was actually further along. And and so we were happy to help, and that's how we got involved.
Yeah. Well, I can't believe that was almost a year ago, Joe. That's crazy how things move. But yeah, we're very happy to have you and Newt kind of supporting what we're doing here too. So that's all great. Thanks for that. So I want to jump to kind of the main topic here, which is longevity as a campaign issue, as it regards to electoral politics. So my first question is about your involvement with Newt's 2012 election campaign. You were highly involved, obviously. Can you share some insight, as to what you learned from that experience, and can you share some stories that from the campaign trail that might be relevant to what we're trying to accomplish, the longevity community is trying to achieve?
Sure. I think there are two examples from the campaign that are relevant. The first is the flack that we got when Newt, when speaking down at the Space Coast in Florida, pledged that by the end of his term, we'd have a moon colony. Now, what he was talking about was an aggressive transformation toward private sector spaceflight. All right. Shifting a lot of the resources over there, setting up contracts, aggressively deregulating the space, to really let the private sector engage. I think if you look back now at what he was saying, I think that a lot of what he predicted and what he was talking about has been proven correct based on the success of SpaceX and Blue Origin and things like that. This being said, in 2012, there is no reward in 2012 for being proven right in 2022. And so if you get too far afield, it can be, you can be hit for it. I don't want to overstate how damaging it was, but it added to a perception that it was a little off, for that. I think that his priorities were a little out of whack. It became something used to caricature. This being said, we and I would say that it's not so much people were against the idea of being more being more aggressive in space. It was more like, is this really what you're going to concentrate on, sort of thing. And there's a risk, I think, for in the longevity space, if this gets characterized as sort of like a rich person vanity project, or really in making sure, if it gets shifted away from preventing this disease to living forever, in a public policy context, I think that that could be politically damaging, and people won't, and politicians won't want to associate with it. This being said, there was a moment in Iowa on the debate stage where Mitt Romney attacked Newt on the moon colony thing, and Newt really hit him hard back and basically said, you know what, there's a university right down the street. All right, there are engineering students there, there are science students. I'm proud to inspire them and set big goals for them. And so he knew exactly how he was going to respond to it. And Crowd really responded positively to that. So, you can prepare to be attacked and understand where you're going to be hit, and understand if you can come back with something inspiring and positive as to why you're doing it, people will respond to that. This being said, that it can be easily defined by other people as being fringe. The other example from the campaign is how we handled the gold issue. Now, I think that gold is similar to aging research and longevity research, and in that it is a niche issue right now. I'm not saying it would always be that way, but right now it's a niche issue. But there are a group of people that really, really care a lot about gold. They care about getting back on the gold standard. They're very dead set against the Federal Reserve, the way it operates, the constant money printing. And for to his credit, I think is always. I'm not sure he's not fully on board with going back to the gold standard, but he's very critical that the Federal Reserve's dual mandate. I don't want to get too far afield here, but essentially the dual mandate is the idea that the Fed has to both worry about unemployment and about the value of the dollar. And that is relatively new. That was something that was adopted in the late 70s. And it used to be before the Fed was really just focused on stable money. And and Newt's been a critic of that. He's like, no, his position has been the Fed should focus on stable money. You let Congress deal with unemployment, all right, or the governors, the elected branches deal with that. And so when we were trying to, put together grassroots groups, we established a strategy of like, all right, how many different niche issues are out there that we can sort of organize and assemble activists and get them on board and add it to our campaign. We found that gold was actually probably the most successful one, especially once Ron Paul, who was a real big critic of the Federal Reserve's, his campaign sort of slipped. We found that we were able to gather those, because Newt was a critic of the Fed and he was open to the idea of at least exploring the idea of the gold standard. And so we had a very targeted communication campaign to the gold bugs, and to explaining Newt's position and where he was. And I tell you, in terms of raw numbers, there wasn't many, but a lot of them volunteered, a lot of them donated, So in terms of the overall electorate, maybe they weren't that many people, but in terms of adding energy to the campaign, it actually it worked a lot. And frankly, I would just say that if you look at the current bout of inflation after the round of money printing we went through, I think there's something to the criticism of the Fed. But anyway, so it turned out we could fly under the radar, organizing all these gold bugs and communicating to them about what we would do to return to a hard money system. without making too much of a fuss elsewhere. And so I think that there's an analogy there with longevity research and reform there, and the entire approach to healthy longevity drugs as well.
Awesome. So just on that same vein, and I think I probably know the answer to your to this question already, but I'll ask it anyways. So in terms of a pro longevity candidate on the debate stage, what do you think that looks like? Is longevity something that can be a primary focus of a candidate, or is it something that should be adopted more quietly in the background? I can see the value and the drawbacks of both, but
Yeah.
what do you think?
So you have to sometimes things aren't issues until they are, and something can happen that where suddenly something causes the public to get very interested in. So I don't want to discount the idea of this being like a major um, political focus or plank in sometime in the future. I'd say we're probably not there yet, and I don't think it's something you can engineer. It's more like something you have to be ready to pounce. You know, and so I think if someone is running right now, is the way things are, I would say that this has to be subsumed within the broader healthcare discussion. What are you going to do to take costs out of the system? If you talk to people what their concerns are on healthcare, it's overwhelmingly cost. It costs too much. All right, so we gotta talk about how to get costs out of the system and how this plays a role. I'd say you have to be careful with public opinion polling, because you did some polling that returned some very positive numbers, and so that's a good thing, and that can tell a politician that, what, I can be for this and probably not alienate too many people if I'm careful that it's framed the right way. But you can't confuse having 70% support for something with 70% of people feel about this so strongly that it will decide their vote, or it will cause them to donate money or volunteer or something like that. So it's not really about being quiet in the way that you're talking about. It's more like being targeted, again, with that gold example. Okay. So in terms of what a pro longevity candidate would look like, I would say that it is a plank in their health platform, and it is something that when they go to universities and to speak to certain audiences, they discuss. And but like I said, sometimes events happen. Like if there is some big breakthrough and there is the right sort of 60-minute segment or Today Show segment, although the broadcast TV is becoming so increasingly irrelevant, I'm not even sure what the analogy is anymore. But where something happens that really grips people's attention, I can imagine that maybe becoming mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to also, so you touched on the poll that we ran last month. And I kind of want to just touch on one of the results that we found that I found kind of interesting. So one of the questions we asked was, do you know someone, or do you know someone who suffers from an age-related disease? And there was over majority support. I forget the exact number. I think it was something like 57% said they do know someone or are themselves suffering from an age-related disease. I mean, the number is definitely higher than 57%, because we all suffer from age-related diseases, right? I mean, or know someone, that number should be 100%. So my question is, how do we get that number closer to 100? Is it, a messaging, is it messaging on our end? Like, do we need to explain what an age-related disease is better to the, public? Where does the public persuasion aspect of this whole thing come into play?
I think, but being honest on this question about what an age-related disease is, it could be that our target is actually doctors rather than straight to people. because people will take that coming from their doctor. And then there's always the sort of doctor proxies like the Sanjay Guptas or the public doctors that people sort of cue off of and trust. I wouldn't, I think if you get people's doctors talking that way, that's probably the success metric. On knowing people that suffer from an age-related disease, there's an additional complication. It's something that I look forward to working with you on as we do future polling and focus groups, because it's an interesting issue. Disease groups have constituencies, and people know someone with Alzheimer's, and so they really want a cure for Alzheimer's. Or they know someone with cancer, they want a cure for cancer. Almost by definition, what we're talking about here, and I know that there are a lot of biotech companies in this space that are actually trying to use aging science principles to treat disease. So I don't want to discount that, but I feel like what we're talking about more is preventing it from occurring in the first place. And so, in a weird way, your public face of that person is someone who is currently healthy, but who will be unhealthy in the future. That's just a less sympathetic person because they've got their health now. And so I think we do need to work on this idea. It's how do you create a constituency similar to like the disease groups or whatever, when it's almost like you're almost not even talking about them anymore. So that is, I think that's just something that's going to have to be worked on as we think about how to communicate to the public. How do you personalize this in a way that makes it about you and your family, but also as you're talking about like in the future, don't we want to prevent this? And I'm pretty sure it can be done, but it's going to take some work. And in that vein, I think that as we think about the politics of what A4LI is trying to do in terms of funding for NIA, one of the biggest tripwires we want to avoid is any perception that we are taking money from cancer research or Alzheimer's research or anything like that and giving it to aging research. And I understand that our vote is like every dollar spent here is like a dollar in every other area. I think there's something to that, but that's just not the way it's going to work politically. We should be able to find additional money for NIA without taking anything else away.
Agreed. Yeah. That kind of defeats the purpose of we want as much money as we can to biomedical research, right? So full agreement there. So let's just switch gears real quick and talk about Congress today. The congressional, the Congress people today. So where do you see support for longevity in both parties? Obviously, you can speak a bit more on the GOP, but where do you see it in both parties? And, more specifically, what subgroups of each party do you think would be most open to supporting the longevity community's initiatives? Do any names pop into your mind? And why?
Well, we've talked to, so there are a lot of doctors in the GOP caucus. They actually have a doctor's caucus that meets every other Wednesday morning. And they mostly talk about healthcare, a little other issues too. And so we've actually mentioned this to them. We were there talking about healthcare policy in general and brought this up. And they understood the idea of prevention. They're also there is sometimes getting again to a messaging challenge. Like people are very invested in this idea of getting people to live healthier lifestyles. And if you talk about an exercise pill, there's a defensiveness or sort of people don't like that idea. And so what we've been toying around with is actually talking about medicine that would allow people to be more active, help them be more active. It's almost like appetite suppressing medicine. So people that are really obese, that have real problems, they take medicine to reduce their appetite. All right. Well, is that cheating? I don't think most people would say that's cheating. But some people would argue, medicine that actually causes you to age slower or whatever, instead of they would view that if it's viewed as a replacement for exercise rather than something, look, this is going to give you more energy, make you more resilient, and allow you to live an active, healthier lifestyle. That could be a way of marketing these things in a more acceptable way that doesn't get as much immediate pushback. But anyway, I say this because the doctors, they've talked a lot about this sort of financial incentive change within healthcare to reward health and wellness, to reward prevention. And it has to do with the fee for service model, and like doctors make money per episode of care. And so how do you actually get them on sort of flat fee where they're just managing a patient? And that way they can really focus them on less, not racking up separate little charges, but like, all right, this is my patient. I'm going to try to keep them as healthy as possible. And there have been various experiments with various degrees of success in doing that. It's hard to get off the fee for service bandwagon, but they understood this concept of prevention, is all I'm saying. And because they like they're comfortable with, they were all familiar with the statins example. All right. And so, because a number of them are cardiologists. So if you basically describe this as statins for tons of age-related diseases, they'll get it. That, by the way, was I did not realize how actually difficult it was to actually get statin cholesterol recognized as a biomarker. And so that is something that we're going to have to think about too. I know that we want separate regulatory pathways. And I think that's a good idea. But even if you look at the recent op-ed that Newt wrote that was in the Epic Times, and is available on our website too, where we talked about the potential of aging research and how it relates to balancing the budget. When we talked about this regulatory framework, we basically said, look, this needs to be done, but it's going to take a while. It's going to take more research. And this is the type of thing that FDA and industry probably need to start working on right now, and expect it to take a while to actually get right. There really needs to be consensus built around these biomarkers and what's appropriate and things like that. So anyway, within the GFB, I would start with the doctors. There are also some very pro science, like really like the cutting edge stuff. Kathy McMorris Rogers is one of them. So I think she would get that. I think we've talked to her staff about this. So she's another one that I think is potentially there. On the Dem side, I don't know them as well. We got, my understanding is that Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is familiar with this space. We've heard that. I heard that from you, Dylan, but then also from others. So that's interesting. She's a little polarizing, but she could at least be an organizer. I know that. I think there are a couple others. I just don't know the Dem side as well. The other tripwire in terms of I think what we need to avoid is I talked about the perception that money for NIA is coming from other diseases. And again, getting back to this biomarker issue, is the idea that we're creating a preferential advantage for longevity biopharma companies. You don't want to get the rest of pharma against what we're doing. Frankly, there is no future in which anytime in the next 2 decades, they don't have more resources. I'm just being totally blunt. And in fact, if longevity is successful, they will have, frankly, I suspect acquired a number of these small biopharma companies. That's just sort of the way it works. You have these little small biopharma companies that then create a proof of concept, and then some big manufacturer comes in. We don't want to create something that they're not comfortable with. I will also add that one of the things you need to think about on the Dem side is that, so there was the orphan drug pathway, which a lot of people consider a success. And the issue is that there are these rare diseases that there's just not a big enough marketplace for it. So they created a special regulatory pathway that creates a market incentive for companies to develop these things, and they get a longer exclusivity period, X, Y, and Z. It's almost worked a little too well. And where you're finding more and more drugs being brought up through the orphan pathway, and then being given designations for more common diseases, and it's allowing these pharma companies to buy. So from pharma's perspective, it's working great. But I think on the Democratic side, there's people they're starting to look at stance that says, wait a minute, you're getting all these exclusivity protections for this thing that's supposed to be for like 100 people, and then you're flipping it around, and then you're charging $30,000 a treatment for something that is for a much wider population. There's going to be some resistance, I think, especially on the Democratic side of a special pathway for longevity out of a fear that it would be abused. That's just something we're going to have to manage.
Sure. Awesome. Okay. Well, so we're at about a half an hour now. So I want to ask one more question here, and then we'll turn it over to the Q&A with the audience. So final question here, Joe. This group, this Foresight group is, I would consider the, premier group of longevity advocates, investors, scientists. This is like the choir. If we're preaching, this is the choir. So what can this group of people do to influence their elected officials' priorities? How would you like to see this group deployed to further the longevity cause?
I mean, there's really no shortcut around writing and calling your congressman. They want to hear it, and make sure it's your congressman. They want to hear it from their constituents. If you were their constituent and you contact them, if their office is halfway competent, they will get back to you relatively soon. Organizing your district, letters to the editor, social media. But I think that, especially probably at this level, the most effective strategy is you bundle donations together, and then you get a meeting based on the fact that you bundle donations together. One of the most effective advocates for NIH funding I've ever encountered. That's what he does. Him and his friends are all NIH advocates, and he'll bundle together $100,000 and $2,300 donations, and basically tell members, look, next time you're in New York City, come by my place. We'll sit down for an hour. I'll explain to you why we need to fund NIH. All right. And that is how you get the members' attention for a sustained period of time in an environment that, and you do it on your turf, not theirs. You don't go to their office. In an environment that, where they don't just immediately have another meeting where they immediately forget what you just talked about. And it's for, and rather than, getting 15 minutes with their legislative assistant, you can actually get an hour with them. That's how you do it. And you do, so that's something that the political arm of A4LI can help with. It's something that, I don't know Foresight's structure or how it's set up, but it's something that could be done through there. But if you really want to get people's attention, there needs to be some sort of lobbying and campaign financing strategy along with that. So you combine grassroots energy. Again, this is a niche issue right now, but if you get people that really care about it, if you can really mobilize 0.5% of the U.S. population, they can create a lot of noise. There are lots of issues, lots of things like that. And so that combination of grassroots energy where you create, all right, so there's a constituency here, and there's people that are actually organized, and there's money here, and there's that dual, I think, communication is the best strategy.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll just say, that A4LI being set up as a 501c4, allows for that campaign finance strategy plus lobbying, right? That's kind of the whole lore of a 501c4. So we'll stop there. Joe, thanks for answering all of my questions. I definitely learned a few things while hearing you speak. So now I want to turn it over to the audience. I've been checking out the chat, and it seems that there are a bunch of questions in here. So I'm just going to ask a bunch of questions, and I'll tell you who's asking them, and I'd love to hear your response. So Stephen Fowkes, so he asked, how would you handle the issue of Social Security financial consequences of a longer lifespan? That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So raising the retirement age would seem like the natural thing to do, except that it's politically toxic and no one's ever going to do it. Um, my look, I suspect, I think that we are moving into a situation where more and more people, if they are healthy, will just keep working because what else are they going to do? Because they like their jobs. I mean, the amount of extremely physically demanding labor is starting to shrink in the U.S. And so I suspect we're just going to start seeing more and more people working longer. All right. And so that creates more tax revenue that goes into the Social Security system. But I suspect that if you are increasing healthy lifespan, and especially healthy lifespan, you will see higher Social Security spending. I'm not sure that at least in the short term that it makes that much of a difference. But I suspect we're just going to end up having to pay it. Like if people are healthy longer, they have more economic activity. They are spending less on healthcare. The net effect is better, but our Social Security expenditures could end up getting high. It could very well end up increasing, and it would be for a good reason. People are living longer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Spending money to have people live in better health for longer is, money well spent.
Yeah.
So, all right. That was a great question. The next one is from Abdul Qadir Ramo. So this is more, I guess, for your experience and, what you've experienced in talking about longevity. How is the appetite of big pharma for switching from a chronic disease treatment style to curative therapy, more with longevity and focus?
They will.
Have you spoken to any big pharma companies?
Yes. Companies, no. I do work with the trade group a little bit. Look, I think that the pharma companies will, if they see a market for it, they'll be interested. I mean, it's pretty simple. They do have a lot invested in this sort of the existing FDA structure. So while they do want changes, I don't know if they want huge changes. There's this sort of the devil, approach there. They will. I understand why the current longevity community is really focused right now on trying to use this technology to treat disease as sort of a foot in the door. And I think that makes sense. But I would say that once someone actually shows the impact of prevention, and that this actually works, you'll see interest from big pharmaceutical companies simply as a way to if it means that their heart disease treatment drug or whatever it is, suddenly there will no longer be a market for it. They'll get in on the preventative to cover their loss because they need that new thing. I don't want to say that people criticize pharmaceutical companies. Well, they're driven by profit. Well, you know what? That happens to produce a heck of a lot of innovation. You get new treatments, you get new cures, get all this new stuff. And, but I don't think that they can stop the release of preventative medicine out of some conspiracy that it will reduce the value of their existing drugs. I just don't think that's the way it works.
Right. Yeah. So there aren't that many. Everybody also just continue to put your questions in the chat here. There's a lot of chat, messages that are more conversation. So if you have any more questions, please put them in. But I actually have a question. Does someone want?
Karl, I think Karl had a question.
Oh, Karl had a question. Let me see here.
You want me to read it, Dylan, or do you want to read it?
Yeah, go for it.
I had two. One is a follow-up to the first question. I don't know anything about who controls the Social Security, the actually allocated Social Security money. And I guess presumably there's not actually a fund maybe of investment money, but rather it's just done as taxes come in or whatever. But is there any chance on getting a portion of government money, actually, government investing on behalf of Social Security in the longevity biotech sector, because the biggest risk to the solvency is people living longer and big success from the sector. So if a portion of the funds to be paid out in the future are actually invested in the companies that are going to make the advances, then you protect a little bit against the insolvency by actually having a higher upside if those advances come to pass.
It's a really interesting idea. I like it. It never occurred to me. I don't know how you would set. Well, I mean, the government does look. You can. There is a Social Security trust fund.
Right.
There's
So who manages that? Can they invest a portion, 5%, 10% in?
I don't think that that money can be used to invest, but you can. The government does invest. So there's a whole. I was looking at the budget the other day, and there's a whole section. It's like net interest on the debt plus investments, and it's currently like negative $400 billion. Well, it turns out that our interest on the debt is actually much higher. It's like 560 billion. But we earn it. The government earns income from investments, property, things like that. So I think that from the general fund, the government could, as a strategy, invest, and you could probably pass a bill requiring investment dividends from investment in the longevity space to go into the trust fund. You could probably set it up that way. But my suspicion is you can't take money from the trust fund and invest it. That has to be, it's single purpose.
Or similar to what you just said, not from investment returns in general, but if maybe there was some way to have a law which directed a portion of tax revenue that came from pharmaceuticals or the health sector in general to go in, they would create some of the same correlation.
Got it. Yeah, it's a good idea. Dylan, it's probably something which you capture.
Yeah. Well, this is all recorded, and we should set something up to discuss this further, Joe and Karl, if you're interested, Karl. But yeah, that's a fascinating idea. Okay. So I want to ask my question.
I recommend this to generally people. This is a good strategy for people's individual retirements too. This is one of the things I advocate for wealthy people to do, to get them to invest in the sector for their own good too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's the good part about this group. Also, there's a lot of new ideas that we don't even think about. There's a lot of brilliant people here, so that's all good. If anybody else has any questions, though, please unmute yourself and feel free to ask. That we can kind of just open it up a little more here. But if there's not another question, I'm going to ask the question that I wanted to ask here. So Joe, with all that's happening right now in the world, I'm sure but there's some geopolitical conflicts that are going on. How do you see, how do you think international collaboration on longevity science can work, despite these geopolitical tensions?
Yeah, the work with China, I think, is probably in peril. I actually don't know how much there is. I don't have that much knowledge of the research ecosystem. So I'll just say that up front. But I do think that there's going to be a broader move in both parties to decouple it from China. There's just too many clashes of values here, and I understand that in the scientific community there is a spirit of collaboration, and I appreciate that. But there's just a blunt reality about the nature of the Communist Party and their control over everything that I don't think can be escaped. And plus the fact that, you look at the way China's planning, how they plan to dominate in AI and other emerging fields. I think there's a biopharma component to that. If you look at their 5 and 10 year planning, I could easily see if this is the next big wave, and I think Newton, I certainly think it could be. It's there with like gene therapy and things like that. They would absolutely see this as in their interest to invest heavily in it, protect their intellectual property, don't let anyone else catch up, and frankly, what they do with in other areas where they steal intellectual property from other countries and other industries. So that's gonna be hard to navigate, I think, and to the degree to which the I don't know how much of it is dependent on China right now and how much is taking place over there, but that is something that if I were a biotech company that was probably maybe international, and I would be very worried about having too much of our assets in China right now. And that's not just true with biopharma. I'd say that that's probably true in every industry out there.
Sure. Cool. So there's a few questions that popped up there. We'll go sorry if I'm butchering your name. Abdul Qadir, you had your hand up there first. If you want to just unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity. I wanted to ask you whether there are close prospects for a government, any government, of adopting actually biological age versus temporal age. You know, that could have a lot of consequences on retirement and Medicare and all this discussion. That's my question. Thank you.
Well, I think. Well, I'd have trouble imagining it being applied to like retirement age, but in terms of having it recognized by Health and Human Services as I should have to go look and I think really understand the way this would work, but I believe that there is a process within Medicare that where HHS recognizes certain conditions or certain things, or it's given an official code or whatever. So that would be a big step, I think, is if HHS started recognizing biological age as something that would, let's say, okay, I haven't really thought much about this, but Medicare Advantage, the way Medicare Advantage is run is that rather than the Medicare paying the doctors directly for services, Medicare pays an insurance company to handle all the costs and procedures of a specific patient. That patient is risk scored. All right. So that it's done that way to prevent insurance companies from deliberately only marketing the healthy people. So a person that is 65, overweight, X, Y, and Z, you know, the insurance company gets more money to cover that person than they do someone who's 65 and otherwise in perfect health. And then so age is a factor, comorbidities are a factor. You can imagine biological age as it gets more accepted. And by the way, the portion of seniors on Medicare Advantage just keeps growing every year. And the reason why is that it tends to also include dental and things like that. And also people are used to their sort of network. They were on Blue Cross with their employer. So when they retire, they just stick with Blue Cross Medicare Advantage. And so more and more people are going to Advantage. And so you can imagine as part of the risk scoring system, biological age being one of the things that is accounted for. And that would, I think it could also be, Medicare may like that because it could potentially produce more accurate risk scoring than sort of like, oh, this person is overweight. Well, are they overweight, but their cholesterol is perfectly fine? Some people are just overweight, you know? That turns out to be a more accurate indicator of a person's health status, then you could see a movement within HHS to start incorporating that to get more accurate risk scores so that, they're actually paying these insurance companies more accurately because right now there's some, of course, it creates the incentive for the insurance companies to inflate risk scores right now, and so and that could become an issue with if the doctor that they're going to see is actually works for like a Kaiser like entity, which is both the insurer and the provider. Anyway, so I can imagine that being adopted at HHS as the science matures. as a way of informing the risk scores for patients in Medicare Advantage.
Great. So we just looking at the time here, we have like probably time for one or two more questions. So Aaron, I think you had a question, so I'll let you unmute yourself, and then
Yeah, I'll let Micah go first.
Micah, yeah, you want to go first?
Sure. So you mentioned there's this kind of rivalry with China that makes collaboration hard. Could we take the other route and do this kind of like the space race against Russia, where if we just do a bunch of propaganda saying, "Hey, China's making great breakthroughs in longevity," and constantly put out media showing their progress to kind of incentivize politicians to kind of support the U.S. fighting back and trying to get our people to live longer, faster?
Yeah, I mean, it could work. That would be the type of thing I think again could be explored in public opinion research. It's less visceral, probably. I don't know. It's certainly something that should be looked into and sort of tested. I'm kind of laughing at it because I'm imagining sort of this Chinese super soldier sort of,
Exactly.
you know,
Can't have that.
message. But there's something there. And you know, if you look at actually, as I think more about China in this space, they've got a real population issue. And because of the one child policy and various other reasons, and not quite as open to immigration as we are. And so you could see this as, I mean, this really is in their interest, to really be investing heavily in this. And so you could imagine some sort of rivalry. I like the idea, Dylan. Again, I think that's something that we should write down and explore in future work we're doing.
Yeah, well, that's again, A4LI is set up to do things like that. So you know, we'll just that sounds like the kind of thing that costs a lot of money, though. So we'll continue to fundraise for something like that. All right. So Aaron, do you want to ask your question and then we'll wrap it up?
Sure. So it's basically just how much for Joe, how much experience do you have with like executive office versus Senate versus House, and which strategy for like pushing, or not pushing, but advancing longevity would be like the fastest?
I mean, it depends entirely who's in office. Look, the fastest path is to get executive branch, because then they can probably get it adopted, you know, get most of their party for it. The downside is that it could polarize the issue if someone like a Biden or a Trump is for it. You know, you just have someone reflexively being against it. But you know, depending on the makeup of Congress and who has control of what, like, I mean, you know, if Biden had come into office with bigger majorities in the Senate and the House, then you know, that probably would have been the smart play. You know, you could get someone there to be for it, introduce it in his budget, and they pass his budget or something equivalent of it. It gets done. I think that ultimately, though, you'd have to develop member support, and it's a constant process of education. The reason why NIH funding dried up a little bit, but it was more like, I think it was kind of flatlined, which became a problem because of inflation. But we didn't really see drastic cuts, I don't think, after we doubled it over 4 years. That was because there was a constituency within Congress that understood the long-term implications of it. It's a constant education process as to why this sort of investment in 30 years in the future is really important, and the dividends it pays. So even if you could get the executive branch on board, I don't. You could have a faster win, but you still got to secure that win with constant lawmaker education, because their focus is the next election. If they're in a swing district, or it's if they're not a swing district and they're in a safe district, they're probably a committee chair dealing with something really like pressing or they're involved in the party's political apparatus. So even then they're focused on the next election. So you need to constantly remind them about this sort of long term interest. So I don't think there's a way. I don't think there's a future in which focusing on the legislative branch is not part of strategy.
Right. And, you know, that's also why step one for us is, you know, getting this longevity caucus together, right? You know, making a permanent, established body within the, you know, legislative branch that will, you know, make sure that not only the people within the caucus are educated on the issue, but, you know, people outside of it will be as well, at least somewhat. So yeah, you know, I'm glad you said that, Joe. Sounds like we're, you know, somewhat on the right path here. So we have 3 minutes here. I think this is a good place to kind of end off. So yeah, let's call it a day. Thank you very much, Joe, for your time. We all really appreciate it. So I still see some questions coming into the chat. I will write these down and ask Joe after the fact, because I also have a hard stop in 2 minutes. So I'll make sure everybody's questions get answered. And, you know, please feel free to reach out to me, Dylan@a4li.org, if you have any more that pop up in your head after the fact. But again, thank you everybody for joining us today. I really, you know, thought this was a productive conversation. I'm glad that Joe was able to give us an hour of his time. And you know, stay tuned, because the next one of these events is next month. So we hope to see you there.